Are there anything sorry. It's like, when you get back to me, so yeah.
Wait,
yeah.
At least one or two. No, just do that.
Right now they're in the conference room by the library.
A couple
I wouldn't tell them.
Still there.
No, sites.
I have come from there was temporary space. You're right. While they were moving.
Not that way, but sites is true.
That's right.
It's not
They're international. Oh, right.
It's the Bloomberg.
Have you figured out what company is it?
Do you have like a required
No, but once you figure it
Have you talked to anybody?
Yeah, let me know if there's something that I can do.
Wow, are you excited? What you guys are making?
Was it?
Was that where you want me to be?
Yeah, all of a sudden.
Yeah, it was down at the end there. It was
That's not what you
no.
So
okay, more than that.
yeah.
Right. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, why don't we get started? I want to welcome you all to the Woodrow Wilson Center. My name is Jeff DeBelco. I direct the Environmental Change and Security program here, and it's a thrill for us to have this discussion today of pop and environmental issues in the context of conflict and stability questions around Nepal. It's not always the case that we're able to do programs that tie into our publication, but in this case, it's exactly what we're doing with having Bishnu Raj Upreddy coming in from Kathmandu, and we appreciate him making such a long journey. And then, as you might notice, we don't have Richard Matthew here at the head of the table. Richard, he didn't call because he doesn't have a voice, and I think he may have typed, but from his bed. He's quite sick, and so he sends his regrets. We tried to set up some video teleconferencing and find some alternative ways, but with no voice, it wasn't much. You could watch him perhaps and react, but that was about all you were going to get from it. So we're hopeful that Richard is watching and listening online at the webcast and can weigh in. But he and Bishnu and I had the opportunity to talk and coordinate things. A lot of familiar faces here, but allow me just a couple words about where we're sitting, what we're up to here at the Woodrow Wilson Center. As many of you know, we're the nonpartisan, non-advocacy official memorial to Woodrow Wilson. He was our only president who had a PhD. And so Congress in 1968 set up an institute where the worlds of scholarship and research can come together, where the worlds of practice and policy to try to learn from one another, something Wilson firmly believed was the case. Sometimes happens in Washington, sometimes doesn't, so we're trying to help it along. The Environmental Change and Security program is a 12-year-old program, and so we take that mission of the science practice or research practice interface seriously in the areas of environment, population, health, development, and bringing together with broader foreign policy, security policy questions that often have us looking at issues of conflict and cooperation, as we will today with both environment and population focus as well. So bringing these together, which commonly brings different folks in the room, and I think if you look at the participants list, you'll see that part of what we're trying to do here is get all of you in the room so you have an opportunity to talk with one another too. So that's really one of the primary objectives that we have with both our publications and our meetings, the primary activities of this 12-year-old program. As is the case with many of our programs, this one is one that we're very thankful for the long-time support from USAID, in particular the Office of Population and Reproductive Health, in terms of making these sessions possible. So thanks to them, and it's great to see some of the folks from there, including our primary partner in crime, Heather Diagnos here. So it's terrific. let me say a word about Bishnu, and then we'll turn the floor over. One other housekeeping issue. We are webcasting this live, and then the video will be archived on the web. So for those who are not with us today, you can direct them to the Wilson Center's site so they can pick that up. But it also means when it comes to the Q&A time that we ask that you wait for one of our colleagues to come to you with a microphone, you identify yourself so the folks watching and listening online can hear your question as well. So Bishnu Preddy, as I said, based in Kathmandu, is the regional coordinator for the South Asia Coordination Office of the Swiss National Center for Competence and Research, which is almost as bad as my saying Environmental Change and Security Program at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. It's a mouthful. But Bishnu is somebody who has spent many, many years looking at exactly the issues that we're talking about today in terms of environment, natural resource management, population health issues in the larger context of conflict and cooperation and development issues in Nepal. He's had a number of teaching posts. He's done an awful lot of work with both kind of on-the-ground practitioner, NGO, and development agencies, as well as the kind of step-back, more analytical perspective that being in a research and teaching position offers. He has a PhD in conflict management from, how do I get in this, never being able to pronounce the Dutch names, but you want to help me out, Vishnu, so I don't butcher? Okay, thank you. In the Netherlands, and so so he's, as I said, has kind of a hand in the practitioner world as well as the scholarly world. So Bishnu is going to make a presentation. We have copies of the slides. There are a few where there are some data on the slides that we were concerned you might not be able to see, so there are copies of those slides out front that I hope you picked up, and then we'll have an active Q&A discussion. So Bishnu, why don't you kick us off?
Thank you, Jeff. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On the behalf of Richard Matthew and myself, I would like to welcome you in this sharing. Basically, this is the piece of work we jointly did in Nepal, and I am going to present that part, as well as at the end I am trying to aid the ongoing peace process and negotiation. Currently, Nepal is in the intense negotiation process between the rebel and the government, so I am also trying to briefly present some progress on that. Most of you know Nepal is a small country situated between India and China. Probably these are some basic information which I have presented in the slide as well as paper, so I may not be going to discuss on that in detail. I hope many of you know Nepal is a poor country with quite hierarchical social caste system, with feudal type of the ruling for several decades, and basically the Rana dynasty ruled more than 100 years with their family type of the oligarchic system, and then there was another partyless political system, panchayat system, and there was multi-party system, and again in the February last year the king took over as a autocratic rule, and there was a struggle, and just in the this April again the people won and the get back the power from the king. So there is a quite long political tussle, power struggle between people and the ruling elites. Currently, when Maoist insurgency started in the February 1996, since then within the 10 years they have expanded tremendously in terms of influence, in terms of geographical coverage, and more than 70-75% is under their control still. There are two regimes, in fact. There are two rules, there are two court systems, there are two armies. They said People's Liberation Army as well as Government Army, and there are two legal systems. So the state, the center, capital city and district headquarters are under the control of the government, and the all rural area are under the control of the rebels. So that is the two regime system exist in Nepal so far. In case of natural resources, there is a tremendously skewed distribution of the resources. Only very few portion of the population controls more than 80% of the land resources, and 80% of the people are using only 20% of the land resources. So land is one of the highly contentious issue which Maoists very strategically utilized to get the support from the people, because the ruling elites of the community are controlling land resources, and based on that they are exploiting to the local community. So that was one of the big issue even in the negotiation process. The population growth, Nepal has a high population growth rates, and it has 5-fold increase in population within the century. So the in one hand population pressure, increasing population pressure, and in the other hand very skewed distribution of the resources make majority of the people more vulnerable, lack of access to the productive resources, and then frustrated, and ultimately fueling to this insurgency. So this unemployed youth particularly, and lack of opportunity for them for the employment, for the work, and any other economic engagement was less. Because of that they have a frustration, and that frustration the rebel were strategically using. Now when there was a big popular movement in April for 19 days which overthrown the king's direct control and established the more democratic political system, then people have some hope. Probably now we are entering to the peaceful transformation of the state, more equitable society, redistribution of the unequal resources, etc., etc. And there is a negotiation going on, but the still quite huge concern is whether the peace process will be successful, or whether there will be the prevalence of feudal elites again in the peace process, and the country will remain as skewed, as unequal, as hierarchical, as feudalistic. So this question is quite concern for all Nepalese. As I said, it is not only the issue of the greed which is fueling the conflict, rather it is more on the grievances of this unequal distribution of resources and excess of power and decision-making process. Huge number of people are illiterate, they are not able to exercise their right. So in that sense, this exclusion became a very important element of the conflict as well as for the peace. Now main agenda is becoming inclusion of the excluded. More than 80% of the total population which were excluded from the political decision making process are now demanding for the inclusion in all political and economic processes. So this is becoming quite a big issue. And so far there is no comprehensive data on how much exactly is the cost of the war in terms of monetary amount, but more than 13,000 people have been killed, more than 25,000 people are wounded, there are more than 300,000 people internally displaced, and almost 100,000 or 2 million people are migrated to India, mainly to India. So in that sense there is a tremendous crisis in terms of impact of the conflict in the people's life. When I quickly recognize the major causes of the conflict, this is, as I said, the skewed distribution of the land and other resources, poverty and unemployment, irrational exploitation of natural resources, mainly in the mid-hills. The afforestation became one of the serious problem, because this smuggler for the wood logging, that is becoming one of the major problem in Nepal. So this type of irrational exploitation, discrimination, and social exclusion and geographical isolation, because so far the government concentration are on the district headquarters and capital cities, and where there are influence of the political leaders. So the resource distribution, national distribution of the resources for the development aid, etc., are mainly concentrated on these accessible areas, and large portion of the people staying outside this area are excluded. They have inaccessibility in terms of transportation, electricity, education, health, all these facilities. So that is also creating a serious problem. That is also one of the causes of the conflict. There was also lack of vibrant civil society. There were lack of proper mechanism to address to the differences in a more democratic way because of the exclusionary practices. This inclusive practices were not there. There were also some strategy of the Maoists. They learned a lot from the Peruvian movement, and they used that strategy, using the Chinese revolution strategy, combining with the Peruvian strategy, encircling to the rural area and coming to the town. So they became quite successful on that. So the strategy and tactics of the insurgent itself was also one of the causes of the massive expansion in Nepal. And there was also population and environmental related factor in all. So far 10th 5 years plan are there, but they are not giving adequate emphasis to the population and environment related issues. If there are some provision in the document, they are not properly translated into practice. Because of that, there is a severe differences on what is written in the document and what has been happened in practice. So all these have created conducive environment for insurgents to expand. Major key player, I have excluded the international actors. They are also one of the key players, but domestic key players are the Nepal army, which was Royal Nepal Army, quite loyal to the king, and they are not practiced to protect the kings for more than 200 years. And political parties, Maoists themselves, and the monarchical force, the supporter of the king and king himself. So these are the major actors within the country, and international community, particularly India, USA, China, UK, European Union are the other external players in the Nepal's conflict. Just I'm giving some idea about this is the April movements where people came to the street against the king's autocratic rule. They were the women organizing peace rally, pressurizing the political parties and the Maoists to go for the negotiated settlement. These are the military during the king's rule who were controlling the whole country, capital cities, press, everything. And there is also a big demonstration from the civil society leaders, and these are the casualties, just to give some glimpse of this conflict. When the Maoist insurgency started, the shift of the priority of the government was from development to the security. So over time they have shifted the resources to the security, expanding to the military bases, expanding to the number of militaries, purchasing of the helicopters and other fighting equipments, arsenal, etc. So the development budget was over time reduced, and that budget going to the conflict. So that also created another frustration among the people. Once the social services were reduced, then people have more frustration. That also fueling to the conflict. So the strategy of the government to suppress the insurgent through the military means had quite negative impact, and it didn't able to suppress the insurgent. So that was the resource shift, priority shift of the government, which also contributed to expand the Maoist. So in that sense, it's not only the Maoist they were able to expand, but also government supported Maoists to expand because of their wrong strategy and wrong approaches. These are the data quickly I have placed in this slide. Probably I'm not going to discuss much on that. And so this is also the pyramid of the population composition of Nepal. So this population, if we look to the demographic situation of Nepal, 17% is the Tarai geographical region, where there are almost half of the total population is staying. And the migration from hill and mountain areas, from these hill and mountain areas to the Tarai is massive. So the population pressure in Tarai is extremely high, and the deforestation pressure to the existing land and other natural resources is quite high in the Tarai area. So this population composition and imbalance in the distribution of the population is also one of the causes. Just this is I am showing to the biographical region. It's high mountain area where there is less population pressure, and this is the area where there is a high density. And as I said, this only 20% of the total land mass is arable in Nepal, and where 78% of the people are depending on that 20% of the land. This land scarcity and economic inequality, as this land distribution shows that only top 5% own 37% of the total arable land, whereas the 47% have less than 15% of the total arable land. And the land controlled by the top 5% are not productive enough, because they all are staying in the city centers, and these are either left uncultivated or only single crops. So the productivity of this land is not high, because the tenants are not ready to invest in this land, because they are not sure they will get their tenancy rights. So there is always manipulation from the rich people while there is a tenancy claim. So the available productive land is also not properly utilized. That is also contributing to the poverty. So before 1975, we were exporting the agriculture product, food substances to India. Now we are also net food importing country. And while looking to the contention on the natural resource and environment, basically when the state position on land, taxation, institution working in the land issue, and local security, agriculture, all that are quite different. The whole strategy of the Maoists since the 10th year is to weaken the state, to keep state out of their area, and to break down their rule, to abolish the institution and re-establish their own rule, regulation and institution. So because of that, they always try to use this land issue, property right issue, ownership issue on the behalf of tenants. They are fighting, they are saying that they are fighting to establish the rights of the tenants on the land where the land tenants are tilling. So this taxation issue becoming quite weak in the government, because government is not able to impose any or implement any of its rule regulation in the local area. So the taxation is shifting from government to Maoist. Now in the rural area, Maoists are taxing in land, Maoists are taxing in forest, all that. So tax is also another contentious issue. All government institutions, district forest offices, land reform offices, they all are almost non-functional in district. So instead of that, Maoists are implementing their own policy, their own strategy. They have their own regulation. They have their own system of governing the land resources. They have their own policy. So they are implementing in that way. So the local security in the local level is quite worse, because there is a tremendous pressure once the military go to the rural area in mass, 200 or 300 at a time, and once they suspect, just they kill to the people, and when they return back, then again they controlled by the Maoists. So in that sense, the rural area is quite insecure and always in the pressure. If there is a full control of Maoist, the people are safer, because army is not generally going there. If there is a full control of the military, that is also secure. Maoists are not going there. But if that is a grey zone, the people are quite insecure, and that situation persists in several areas. In agriculture, there is also tremendous pressure from both sides. Maoists say you shouldn't pay the to the landowners. You should not give any share to the landowner. You have to keep your own and you have to pay to us. And the government say you have to pay. So that type of the tension exists. And when military suspect that these crops are somehow risky for their security, then they ask people to stop, not to cultivate in that. Or if that is a standing crop, just they want to cut. This type of priority in the security is becoming agriculture almost non-functional. Maoists are not allowing agriculture products to go to the district headquarters, and government is not allowing food stuff to go to the village because it will be used by the Maoists. So that type of the restriction also creating tremendous pressure. In the same way, in the forest, Maoists are using forest as one of the major source of their war, economic source for their war. The logger smugglers are involved in that logging business, and they are paying tax to the Maoists, and Maoists are giving in that way. And there is also this smuggling gang who smuggles woods and logs to the India, are very active at that time because government is not able to control. Maoists are not giving priority. So at that time, these smugglers are also active. So that is the situation of forest. And in case of water, the big water resources project are not operational because of the threat of the Maoists. Maoists ask either big amount of money to them, or they ask to stop these projects. So big water resource projects are not operating since some years, and if they are operated, there are some sort of arrangement, informal arrangement between the project and the Maoists that they will give some amount and then they are operating. So in that way, total environmental project, natural resource management project are affected, severely affected because of this conflict. The conservation is another dimension of this conflict. When there was a tremendous degradation of resources, government decided to declare many of the areas as a conservation area. In that process, they ignored the right of the people, the users' right of the people, and then again, in the name of the declaring the conservation area, they were making people frustrated with the government because the usual practices of people access to these resources were prohibited. So that also helped to fuel the conflict. And we have conducted one study. IUCN, in fact, with the financial support of USAID, conducted the study where Richard Matthew and myself were also involved in that analysis, and we found that when the Kosi Tappu area was declared as the conservation area, there was a serious denial of the access right of the local people, and almost 50 or 60% of the people who were denied that right were supporting directly to the Maoists. That type of the situation arises. Once there is a denial of the right, existing traditional right of the people at that time, people become very frustrated, unhappy, and if the warden or the local authority continues that type of the practices, then they start to revolt. So when Maoist insurgency started, that was the right moment for the local people to revolt with the conservation officers. So the Kosi Tappu became one of the contentious area between the conservation officials and the local people. Just this is where we have conducted this study, and the one dimension here is this was the border where there was a big Kosi barrage was constructed in the border between Nepal and India, and that barrage has a tremendous impact on the submerge of the land when they close the barrage, and many poor people have direct negative effect in their cultivation. So that also created some sort of frustration, and when people requested Nepal's government to discuss with the Indian government and open this barrage to go to pass the water. At that time, it didn't happen in many times. Because of that, the poor people's house were submerged, cultivated area was submerged. So again, they become frustrated, and then they supported the Maoist rebellion. As I said earlier, there was a trend since 1950s to move from hill and mountain areas to the Tarai. Because of that, the pressure was increasing, and King Mahendra at that time make the strategy to make the demographic balances from moving people of the hill group to the Tarai, so there will be some sort of protection from the Indian invasion, something like that. With that psychology, the people were encouraged to move to the Tarai all over the country. And Kositapu is also one of the area where huge number of the people from the mountain went there and started to cultivate, and the indigenous peoples area were encroached from the migrants. So that also became another source of the tension. And if I look to some of the natural resource or biodiversity impact, basically, as I said, almost all users group working in the community forestry or forest resources or water resources were not able to operate in their own. Either they have to accept the Maoist rules and regulation, or they have to stop. So in that way, very nicely evolving community-based resource management practices were disturbed. Military also encroached to many of the offices, many of the forest area, saying that they are security risk for them, and so they want to control. And Maoists targeted all the government offices located in the rural area. For example, district forest offices, range offices, agriculture service center, this type of the buildings. So destruction was there as well. And just for example, the estimated annual transaction of 2.5 billion rupees from medical hubs were totally disturbed. And most of them were pulled by the Maoists because they completely stopped government to pay the tax, and then instead of that they started to collect from there. So there are few very expensive, high value, low volume medical hubs in the mountains of Nepal, where Maoists started to collect and send to China or to India, smugglers involved in that. And because of that, the scientists working on this expensive medical hubs say that these are few of the very expensive hubs which are going to disappear, or there is serious negative threat because of the irrational exploitation. So in that way, failure of the government to regulate the natural resources and imposition of the Maoist rules and regulation and two-state system is creating enormous pressure on the natural resources and environment. But after the April 2006, there are also some good signs, because Maoists decided from their central committee meeting that they will opt for the multi-party democracy, they will go for the parliamentary election, they will go for the human right, respecting human right and competition, rule of law. So that is one dimension. They themselves realize that they need to transform to be competitive in the 21st century. So that was one evolution within the Maoist insurgents. The other side is that when King took over, then the 7 major political parties of the country came together and formed a type of the alliance to fight against the King, and Maoists were supported that, and India played important role in bringing these 7 parties together. So when this 7 party came together and when Maoists supported that, there was a tremendous hope for Nepalese people that now something is going to happen, something is going to change. So they decided to support to the movement called by seven party alliances. There was a national protest program, and people from every corner of the country came. Huge number of hundreds of thousands of women, children, elderly people all came to the street in rural area as well to support that, saying that Maoist and seven party alliances will work together and transform into a more inclusive nation. So in that sense they came, and finally king has to surrender, and king gave the power, and the demand of the seven party alliance was met, and then they formed new government, and Maoists declared the ceasefire. So the more conducive environment was created, and government withdraw the terrorist tag which was leveled to the Maoist for several years, and red corner notice, and government was also declared the bounty of the heads, some 5 million for the head of the leader of the Maoist, etc. So all that, and that also created more conducive environment. They both formed the peace dialogue team, negotiation team from the both sides. They also formed the peace committee, and there is also national monitoring committee on the ceasefire of code of conduct which is operating in Nepal, and the House of Representatives, which was dissolved by the king earlier, was reinstalled from the declaration of the king on the 24th of April when the people won, and that decided to go for the Constituent Assembly election, which was the demand of the Maoist from the beginning. So in that way, this all positive events are coming in, and interim Constitution Draft Committee was formed jointly by the Maoist and government, and that committee produced the draft of the interim constitution, though there is some unclarity, but still that is coming there. And so these all are quite positive. Within a very short period of time, within 4 or 5 months, many things happened in the positive direction. And currently, in this week, there is a very intense negotiation going on few of the highly contentious issues. One is the position of the king itself. The Maoists say we have to declare Republican right now, and we have to, if seven parties declare the Republican, then king has no space to stay. But seven parties are saying that no, it's not right time. Let's wait until the Constituent Assembly election, and there is some sort of debate among the seven party alliances. Some wants to decide the fate of the king through the referendum, and others want through the Constituent Assembly election itself. So that negotiation is going on, and just I read there is some sort of understanding to wait until the Constituent Assembly election, and Constituent Assembly election first meeting will decide the fate of the king. So that is more or less the understanding between the Maoist and seven party alliance. Another important element is separating arms from Maoist before they join to the interim government, because there is a series of steps they have declared. When there is a negotiation, then there will be an interim constitution, then interim government where Maoist will take part. So they have also negotiated that, and the seat, etc., all are agreed. But the issue is that Maoists are saying, no, you should not disarm only us. If you want to disarm us, either you declare the Republican state, or if you all form the type of the joint declaration that all party will go to the Republican system in the Constituent Assembly election, then we are ready to separate our arms. Otherwise, we don't believe it to the Nepal army, which is loyal to the king, and at any time king again can play with the Nepal army. That's why we don't want to lay down all our arms. That is the demand of the Maoist, and the state is saying, no, we have started to democratize the military, so you have to give up the arms before coming to the interim government. But just there is a latest progress in my understanding that 50% of the arms of the Maoist will be locked, and they will take the key, and UN will supervise. And even now what I heard, the Maoists are agreed to lock up all their arms but to key with themselves, and UN will install the CCTV and they will monitor at any time, and in that agreement and locking of some 50% of the arms of the Nepal military, they are also agreed on that. So in that sense, we are moving very fast to the positive direction, and hopefully within few weeks there will be interim government. At least we Nepali are hoping on that. The difficulties there is that the position of the USA repeatedly saying, American ambassador is repeatedly saying that our official position is that we don't want Maoists to join the interim government without laying their arms. So first they have to disarm, and few days ago American ambassador visited New Delhi to discuss that issue. The outcome is not known, but what we heard, USA placed its strong position with the India that it shouldn't allow. But yesterday there was a meeting between the ambassador, Indian ambassador, and the Maoist head in the Indian embassy. Probably there is some sort of agreement. So in that sense, something are quite positive, but still uncertain, because nobody knows what happens within few days. So in that way, we are hoping within the June 2007 there will be a Constituent Assembly election, and that Constituent Assembly election will elect the representative to write the constitution, and afterwards there will be a democratic election for the local and central government, and Nepal will turn into a new inclusive nation. That is our hope, but we don't know what happens. So in my conclusion, because of the policy and strategy of the government to ignore the demand of huge number of unemployed people, fail to employ them, there is still great risk, because the unemployed youth is always reservoir for this type of the civil unrest. And if government is not able to properly tackle this situation, if government is not able to provide the employment to the large mass of the rural youth, at that time the risk is still there. The economic reform, the economic opportunity, creating more economic opportunity for local people, including the ethnic groups, women, marginalized people into the decision making process, it is still a big challenge, because political parties themselves are not yet realize the need of that inclusion. Once they come to the power, they realize just taking power from the king and they are ruling the country is the inclusion. But still, if we look to the composition of the political parties, they are elite captured, they are more feudal, and there is a tremendous risk of exclusionary practices even after the ruling of the political parties. So the other dimension is that this environmental issues, natural resource management issues are not priority at all until now, even in the peace talks, in the negotiation, in their development agenda, post-conflict reconstruction and economic opportunities not in their agenda. So there are some possibilities of ongoing unrest in Nepal even after the peace negotiation and new government and Constituent Assembly election. Two important dimensions I observed in the Nepal's arms insurgency. One is that it has a tremendous negative impact in terms of environment, in terms of natural resources, but there is also equally important positive impacts in terms of empowerment of women, in terms of empowerment of the poor, Dalit, socially excluded, marginal group. There is a tremendous positive impact in terms of asserting rights and responsibility of the citizen. Because of the Maoist insurgency, people are aware that they need to establish their right. They have equal right as the leaders or the elite. So that type of the empowerment is the greatest achievement of this Maoist insurgency. So in my conclusion, I conclude that there is a diverse impact, both positive as well negative. In terms of financial economic terms, it has more negative impact, but in terms of long-term nation building process, I realize there is a tremendous positive impact, because once the people are aware about their rights, responsibility, so this all exclusionary practices, this top-down hierarchical feudal type of the structure will be changed. And in my understanding, still the role of international community is quite important, particularly USA and India in terms of strategic support, and European Union and other countries in terms of development support. If there is a failure of the ongoing negotiation, at that time international community will be in the great dilemma. At that time political parties will be in losing position, Maoist will be in the losing position, and only the king will be in the winning position because of the failure. So now it is a strategic interest of all major actors except the king to make this negotiation successful, and therefore they all are working in that line. So, being a Nepali, I am still looking, there is a tremendous hope for us to be more inclusive nation, to progress from poor country of the world to the more democratic, rich country, and there are some signs of hope which we can see. Thank you.
Thank you. Terrific. Thank you very much, Bishnu. You give us certainly a good understanding of the larger political context and what's going on now, and also how the environmental and demographic variables fit into it in conjunction with those other political, social, and economic variables, not kind of set aside by themselves and treated separately, but how they're integrated into the whole mix. And it's also nice to be talking about a case in this context where there is actually some kind of an end to the conflict and at least an ongoing negotiation process and moving in positive directions. So why don't we open it up for discussion? As I said, because we're webcasting it, we ask that you use a microphone that my colleagues Sean and Karen will bring to you, and if you could let us know who you are before you pose your question, that'd be great. So who would like to kick us off? In the back there? And yeah. And then Severine. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had a question from the article, which is also in the paper.
And could you tell us who you are, ma'am?
I'm sorry. My name is Augusta Molnar. I'm from the Rights and Resources Group in Washington, D.C.
Perfect, thanks.
One of the recommendations in the written article is to use the Millennium Development Goals as a policy-making and indicator monitoring basis for trying to move forward. I guess the question is, in fact, those Millennium Development Goals have not taken on land tenure reform or taken on resources, forest resources, as a basis for mobilizing poverty reduction. On the other hand, what you seem to be bringing forward is this disjuncture between the high dependence of the rural Nepalis on forests and on resources, the Maoist sort of very conflicted attempt to use that as a means of fueling their own movement, but also raising the question, isn't there therefore a lot of potential poverty reducing value in those resources, and are those consistent?
Probably when we talk about this resource management part and the broader development part, we have to look from the historical perspective as well. In the past 5 decades, when we got systematic financial development assistance from international community, the USA was the first, I guess, to support to the first 3 years plan of the Nepal, and since then the development policy itself are also not able to address to the root causes of the problem in resource management or in other infrastructure development or whatever they are. So there is tremendous influence of this type of more exclusionary development project. And if we want to really reform that, this should be the basic indicators why they failed, why they are not able to address to the real concern of the poor people, excluded people, and what should be doing. So in that sense, this indicators we are talking about should look to the broader historical dimension of the development. Then only we can be able to redesign the development intervention and resource management intervention together.
Severine?
Thanks very much. Severin Rugumamu, Fellow, Wilson Center. I've been impressed by the progress made in the political arena, what you are planning to do and what you have done. However, I'm a little concerned on the economic side, and I would like to know what type of a development model you have in mind that informs conflict transformation to sustainable development. And here I want to bring to your attention the conventional wisdom that comes from the World Bank, where it talks on democratization reforms and economic reforms. But the economic reforms is market-driven reforms, which make the poor poorer, the richer richer, the poorer insecure, and erodes the capacity of the state to provide resources necessary to secure peace and conflict. Because after all, government are told to cut even into resources that are supposed to be earmarked for security during this period of transition. So my question is, do you have, or have the Maoists come up with an organic development model that is peace-friendly?
Thank you. This is really a very big question we are discussing in Nepal, and whenever I have a meeting with the political leaders, Maoist leaders, every time in the peace committee or in the talk committee member, I was raising that the post-conflict development, it is not thrown properly. What Maoists say, they have a model to develop to include all excluded people, but they are also not coming in the comprehensive way that, look, that is the model how we are going to implement, and that is the model how it will help to the poor people. But what some general understanding is developing is that the development of the infrastructure, particularly to the rural area, the electricity, roads, and social services like health, education, and drinking water, more or less in the conventional style, will also provide the opportunity for local people to engage in the process and to develop the capacity, as well as to generate the local employment. That is the thinking. But our National Planning Commission is one of the least useful institution in Nepal, which never think in that way. And several times there is a regular this Nepal assistance group meeting, or they say Nepal support group meeting, where the all international community, major donors involved in, including World Bank, Asian Development Bank, IMF, and others are there. And whenever we raise that issue, the National Planning Commission always escape with the critical reflection. So my own concern as well is the lack of proper understanding or conceptualization by the major political forces of the country about the importance of the post-conflict development strategy, development model. So far, neither it is the agenda of the peace talks, nor it is the special program offered by any of the political parties. Just they are thinking National Planning Commission will do continuously what they are doing, and now the National Planning Commission is bringing interim 3 years interim plan, where they are just continuing the conventional development. So in that sense, I see there is not really that much, and that is one of the worries for us, and my appointment with you to discuss that issue is also part of that. Thank you.
Okay.
University of Maryland. I wanted to ask you to elaborate a little bit. You started to in this answer, but elaborate a little more on one of the bullet points in your conclusion, which was about the breakdown of community-based natural resource management systems. And I guess I had several questions. First, to what extent is that rooted in the violence, and to what extent is it rooted in the broader transformations in recent decades that you've been describing about population growth and land scarcity and urbanization and so on? And second, what role would you see for traditional community-based natural resources management as part of this broader strategy? Because on the one hand, we know that the whole international aid economy often just passes right over the top of that and doesn't connect with it at all, or even makes things worse. On the other hand, if things have been this unequal for this long in Nepal, then many of those community-based systems are organized around helping people survive under conditions of marginalization, which we hope to transform as part of the conflict transformation. So what place do existing and culturally rooted or historically rooted natural resource management practices have in a conflict transformed Nepal?
There are two things really. To what extent this violence has contributed to break down the community-based resource management in one side, and the other is the population demographic pressure and all that. This is the combination of both, in my understanding. Basically, in the short term, all indigenous community resource management practices operated in Nepal since long time are forcefully broken by the Maoists. They have their strong argument, and there is also some justification that historically indigenous community-based resource management practices are also elite bias. They are more controlled by the local elites. They are more concentrated on the interest of the local elites. In that sense, that needs to be broken down if it has to transform into a more inclusive. That is one dimension. The other dimension is that even well-functioning resource management practices, for example, community forestry practices, which is said to be one of the successful community-based resource management model in the world, is also affected equally. So in that sense, there is both dimension. But what has been in the broader debate currently at Nepal is that the indigenous right of the indigenous community must be respected, recognized, and they have to have the authority to manage in their own. So if the government recognizes that right, according to the ILO Convention 169, and at that time, many of the community-based resource management practices, which are more equitable, more systematic, will be continued and contributed to the durable peace. But these indigenous rights are not respected, particularly when there is a nationalization of the forest, when there is a new Land Reform Act. All these new acts and Wildlife Conservation Act, they have imposed severe restriction to the indigenous rights. In that way, indigenous community, which is basically the manager of natural resources for several decades, are unhappy, and the current debate is to ensure their right. But what Maoists are raising in terms of the breaking to the feudal control community-based resource management is the right decision to move to the society. So instead of looking to this conventional type of the resource management practices, the recognizing indigenous right and helping them to manage themselves will be the best idea. That is the debate going on in Nepal.
Rich?
Richard Sinkata, National Intelligence Council. I have more of a mundane question. I mean, you put together lots of ingredients here that make for a persistent civil conflict. I missed where the arms come from, and I missed the role of China. Since China is a neighbor, and it doesn't seem to be, and it's a Maoist revolution, though I realize that does not necessarily include Chinese involvement. But what happened to those two elements?
Thank you. Role of China. There was one type of perception in the world that Maoists are using name of Maoist, and China must be supporting to the Maoist insurgency in Nepal. In fact, that is not right. From the beginning, China was opposing to the Maoist, and China was basically concerned in their own foreign policy, that is to have the stable force in Nepal, and Palace was the stable force, and they have a special tie with them. At least in my understanding, at least majority of the intellectual in Nepal understood that China has a very strong tie with the Palace, and until 2005, China was keep quiet, very closely watching how India is playing the role in the whole conflict, and if there is some sort of development going on which directly affect the interest of China, at that time China raises the concern, otherwise it was quite distant. And Maoists attempted to bring some of the arms from the Tibetan border, and at that time China confiscated the arms and arrested the Maoist cadres and jailed them. But particularly after the people's movement, China is distanced from the Palace, and now they are also more proactive in supporting to the democratic forces and committing to assistance, financial assistance for development, etc. But still, the Chinese influence is not that high in Nepal, but they are very closely watching. The Chinese diplomacy is quite silent. Only they watch, they look, they talk, but it is not coming to that much in the public. But the American diplomacy is very direct and quite controversial as well, like the Indian. Regarding the source of the arms, basically most of the arms Maoists obtained from the Royal Nepal armies. When they fight, they captured. Most of the cases they own and they captured. And in addition to that, they also brought arms from India, because our three sides of the border are open, and most of the Maoist leaders have very good idea about the India. They grew there, they studied there, and they are also bringing arms from there. And in addition to that, they also started to produce, after the 2003, they have started to produce in their own. They have also mechanical engineer, they have also this civil engineer, so they started to produce themselves within the country as well. And in addition to that, we heard the small arms survey shows that some of the arms are coming from this global armed traders, smugglers, which coming through the Bay of Bengal to the Bangladesh, and then goes to the Kashmir, goes to the Assam, goes to the other East Indian states and to the Nepal. So in that way, there are many sources, but in my understanding, majority of the arms with the Maoists are from Nepal army itself.
I'm Krishna Shroff from World Learning. Being a Nepali, I would like just to ask a kind of intimate question regarding the excluded people, how they will be benefited from this political change in Nepal. As I understand from your presentation, that the most recent revolution will bring a political change in Nepal, bringing Maoist into the mainstream of the politics of the country. In the absence of economic agenda, how the marginalized groups or the women or the excluded caste, like Dalits, will be benefited from this whole process, change process, and still there are like 20% of the people you mentioned in your presentation that they are highly educated and they control the overall resources of the country. In that situation, if there is a political change, how the marginalized people will be benefited?
Obviously, that is a very big challenge for the political leaders, political parties, and Nepal as a whole. Now, the economic agenda is missing. Though they are talking about some issue about the economic opportunities, but so far Maoists are bringing their own economic reform policy, which is also not that different from what is happening in Nepal. Just they are saying they will reform the land, they will assure the access of land to the poor people, Dalit, they will nationalize some of the money collected by the corrupt politician from the corruption, all that they are saying, but there is no clear economic package, post-conflict economic package, how they are going to do. But what is happening, there is a tremendous pressure from within the social excluded group. For example, the Dalit, ethnic minorities, women, all they are exerting pressure to bring to deliver something. So it is not easy for the political leaders or political parties, Maoist, to resist that, and they must deliver something. Now the big challenges, they are also exercising to some extent. They are forming some discussion group, getting some input from the external, international expert, international community, how to respond to that economic change. So there is no ready-made comprehensive answer, but looking to whole dynamics, because I am also engaged in the peace process, partly with the political leaders, how I see they are quite struggling how to do that, and European Union and other international aid agencies are quite supportive, and they are saying if you come with the proper program, we are ready to help to the post-conflict reconstruction and rehabilitation. So in that sense, there is tremendous opportunities. There is some gap of knowledge. So I do not think social excluded people will not have this opportunity to be engaged in this whole transformation process. In the political process, they have already started, though it is not satisfactory, that is not up to the required level, but already they are thinking, they are trying to engage. But in terms of economic reform agenda, how it will come, it takes time. Nobody is clear yet, but probably within few years there will be something. That is how I anticipate.
There we go. Across the table and then back.
Hi, thank you very much for your presentation. Adam Sloat from USAID. Actually, following on to that question, two areas of investment that I've heard mentioned that have potential for increasing economic growth in Nepal following the conflict are hydropower and roads. And I was wondering what your thoughts are in terms of your perceived usefulness of those two types of investments, as well as perhaps some of the anticipated unintended consequences, especially on the environment, of those two activities.
This is really very important issue. As I said earlier, the infrastructure development is one of the priority already agreed by the political leaders. So in that sense, road is obviously one. They, in the conventional way, they have identified fuel like the rural electricity, hydro power, road, public sector like the health and education. These are they have already discussed. In that sense, your area of identification is quite matching with what the politicians in Nepal are also thinking. Regarding the unintended consequences, obviously there is a big choice for us whether we have to go for the more environmentally friendly small type of the project, or we should go for the big project funded by World Bank and others, big donor. There is always debate and discussion, but in my understanding, there is a pretty clear that this infrastructure will be one of the top development priority in the coming years.
Hi, my name is Cynthia Brady. I'm also with USAID. And from an environmental perspective, you commented quite a bit on the grievances that have fed into the conflict, and you touched a bit on the greed side of the equation, illegal logging, the military. And I wonder, from your perspective, who are the most important spoilers to consider moving forward, and how would you recommend engaging them in the peace process?
Spoiler of the peace process or spoiler of the environment?
People who would wish to spoil the peace process because of what they have the potential to gain from exploiting the environment.
Okay. probably it's more conventional answer. When I look to the whole dynamics now, the most resisting force is the military. They are not ready for the restructuring, because earlier, when there was a Maoist insurgency started in 1996, there were some 42,000 military, and within 10 years, the number reached to 97,500. So it's more than double, and they have started in FM radio, they have started in business, they have started to control politics everywhere. So almost the society was militarized, and now there is a big debate going on, and every day the chief of the army goes to the prime minister and pressurizes, don't agree on that, don't do that, don't do that. Maoists are precisely asking to restructure the military, because the nature of the Nepalese military is quite feudalistic. It is nurtured, trained, grown to serve the king, and king is one of the fundamental causes of the problem of Nepal. If that is the case, then why this military should be kept as usual? And you must restructure that. That is the demand of the Maoists. And political parties, they agree when they meet together with the Maoist chief and they discuss. And next morning, the chief of the army goes and talks with the prime minister, and the prime minister starts to change his position. And almost 60% military are believing in the democracy, who are recruited after the 1990s political change. They are progressive, but they are not in the decision making. And one of the major spoilers of the whole peace process, in my understanding, is the military. The other one is the faction within the Maoists, who are gaining much from extortion, because they no rule. They go with the gun and they grab the resources from the community. So they want to continue that. And these two elements are important, in addition to the smugglers who are engaged in smuggling wildlife, this non-timber forest products, timbers. That is another group. And in one sense, probably it is too hard and it may not be appropriate, but there is a wide public perception that USA is also one of the spoiler of the peace process, because of interfering unnecessarily on this internal dimension and putting unnecessary conditions. So that is the public perception, media reporting, and that is another element. The fourth element is the India itself, because India is always playing the contradictory role. Sometimes it is quite supporting this. Bringing 8 parties together, 7 parties together was precisely the help of the India, but India is also arresting Maoist leader and keeping in the jail, sometimes sending to the Nepal, sometimes placing very awkward type of the conditions which most of the Nepalese people don't like. So in that way there are some external factor as well, but probably these all are secondary if there is a more comprehensive internal force. In internal force, I realize the military and the one faction of the Maoist who is more extracting resources for their personal benefit are the most spoiler.
Right next, Cynthia Bryan, and then we'll come on.
Thank you. My name is Brian Greenberg, and I'm with Winrock International. I very much enjoyed your presentation and have enjoyed looking at your paper, A Decade of Armed Conflict. One of the things that comes across in that paper is that there is a long list of contributing causal factors to the conflict. In many senses, it's overdetermined in that a shorter list of these conflict risk factors could result in the kind of conflict that we're seeing, and there are many, many. But a look at that paper leaves the impression that you don't feel, at least in that consideration, that population and environmental degradation are all that central in terms of explaining the patterns of the conflict. But then in today's presentation, in the title, again, you return to population and environmental change, and for obvious reasons, because it's an important issue of consideration here. But in terms of explanatory power, how much do those issues shape the nature of the conflict? And if I could just explain a little more what I mean. If population growth and environmental degradation were primary drivers of the conflict, one might expect that you could map conflict onto the locations of the highest population growth and the most rapid or most severe environmental degradation. And the historical patterns in Nepal are that the conflict began in central western districts, apparently for a long list of the social and economic and political factors that you've considered. And that if one were going to predict conflict driven by population and environmental stresses of one kind or another, a major question then becomes, why would it take the shape of a Maoist conflict? Why would that be the ideological backbone for it? And the reason that these issues are important to consider is that if we're talking about conflict mitigation, we would want to have a pretty clear sense of the strength of the important conflict variables and the relationship between those, importantly, because presumably you would determine your interventions according to which of those were the strongest factors. So my question would be for you then, in Nepal's context, how useful is the concept, is a sort of a more traditional model of root causes and proximate factors and triggers, which you seem to feel that there's some use for at some point, but that doesn't seem to be supported necessarily by the empirical situation and the analysis that you provide. So I guess it's really a question of, do these kinds of models help us in figuring out what to do in the specific context of Nepal? Because if we say that population and environment are important, we might want to work through reproductive health programs, or we might want to do reforestation if we believe that those are root important causes of this. And I think it's easy to see that that wouldn't be a particularly effective kind of approach in this case, and that the other approaches are responsible for the kind of impressive political progress which seems to be taking place right now. So,
thank you. Very interesting question. Really, in my understanding and in my engagement in this research and debate discussion, what I realized, demographic and environmental issues are underlying causes of the conflict in any way. But the major issue here is that the policy of the government, because if government policy was more inclusive, if it was diverted, focused to the rural community, to this population and environmental issue, obviously it may not be that serious. But when I analyze this and try to put into the different causes, proximate causes, structural causes, or triggers, whatever it is, my understanding is that the fundamental is the government failure, and the basic for that is the nature of the state itself, very exclusionary, top-down, feudalistic nature of the state, that has promoted to the environmental degradation, that has promoted to the lack of management of the population issues. But it is not the main cause in my understanding. The main cause is basically the nature of the state itself, which needs to be transformed, and if it is transformed, then environmental and population related issue will be addressed. And the other questions, why it is reflected in the Maoist movement, because as I explained, the environmental issue, particularly the resource ownership issues, which was quite controlled by very few elite of the country, has frustrated huge number of people, and Maoists were tactically used that. If Maoists were not there, there would be someone who is coming to that issue, because it's Maoist insurgency is only the manifestation of this whole structural problem of the country. If there were not Maoist ideological basis, there would be someone else. But why Maoist came in? Because they have the ideology, strong ideology that the poor people excluded should be included in the process, and this feudal structure of the state is the cause of the problem. That is how they started. In their 40-point demand, which they have submitted before they started their insurgency, they have precisely laid down these issues in their 40-point demand to the government. So in that sense, Maoist movement was a reflection of the whole system. But later, when the conflict became complicated, it has more cause and consequences type of the relation with the population and demography itself. When Maoist started the revolution, then the environment was more degraded in particular area. The population dynamics was quite changed. For example, elite rich people of the rural area all displaced. They were not able to stay in their community. Either they have to leave or they have to surrender with the Maoist. Maoist captured the land of the landowner of the community. If you go now, you will hardly find any of the exploitative elite in the community. Now only there is an agreement between government and Maoist that they will return the land to the captured land. They will allow the displaced people to go to their community. So now some people are going. But if you look to the 2005 situation, almost none of the so-called exploitator of the community were out of the local area. So the demographic composition itself also changed because of the Maoist insurgency, and the environmental stress was also increased because of the Maoist insurgency. So it's not only the cause, it's also the consequences cause relation.
Okay. Yeah, Mary and then Rich.
Yes, Mary Mullen. I just was wondering what religion played or does play in Nepal in the past with the old regime, now with what's happening now, and if it was beneficial, or if it was, has it been harmed by the Maoist?
This is really a very important issue for Nepal, because Nepal was a declared Hindu kingdom, and there is also a vested interest of the king to declare Nepal as the Hindu kingdom, because the Hindu religion is very much politicized in Nepal, and it is always used for the political benefit of the feudal elites. King is said to be the incarnation of the god Vishnu, and the whole, I don't know the philosophy of the Hindu religion, though I born in the Hindu family, I don't know much about the Hindu, but many people said the philosophy of the Hindu is not that exploitative, but later when the ruling elite used that for their benefit, it was very much abused to maintain this status quo, maintain this unequal social structure, and very unwanted practices. Even you can't imagine in the 21st century, this type of the practices are contained in this Hindu religion, Hindu religious practices. So because of that, huge number of people, for example, the discrimination against the women, that was precisely one example. Discrimination against Dalit, discrimination against, there is a connotation of touchable, untouchable, though even some people are labeled as untouchable, and people don't drink water touched by them. That type of the brutal, inhuman practices are nurtured and protected by the Hindu religion. That has a tremendous impact. But when there was a 1990s people's movement and the autocratic political panchayat system was overthrown and multi-party democracy was established because of the political changes in the world, because of the democratic movement across the world, some changes were there. but still there was a huge expectation of the Dalit, women, socially excluded group that this type of practices will be stopped. But government was almost failed to address that. So this discontent, frustration among the people who were excluded in the name of religion, in the name of culture, in the name of tradition, were supporting to the Maoist. In that sense, the Hindu religion has a tremendous role to promote the Maoist insurgency. But in the other side, there were almost Christian religion was banned in the Panchayat politics. After 1990, the Christian religion was expanded. Hindu, Buddhist religion was suppressed, though not banned, but it was also not promoted. Now it's open. Muslim religion was almost suppressed and neglected. Now it is also. In that sense, there is some religious flexibility in religious freedom, but still the domination of the Hindu religion in terms of culture, value, tradition of the community is promoting conflict.
Okay. Rich, did you have another question?
Yeah, I just had one quick one. Was the basic question is whereas no one addresses conflict with family planning programs, or of course, but it's not an immediate way to address a conflict that's steeped in a long and treacherous social history. On the other hand, when you take a look at the age structure that you showed, I mean, you were showing it for a good reason, because it's the one that's associated with so much volatility. And you have to wonder when you see a country like Nepal, where that's eked out so much of the land already, and it has rapid urban growth, that an age structure like that is just, it doesn't make for very long-term solutions. Any solution that you made to try to reach sustainability is going to have to be redressed continually. Also, you have this volatility of people, of young men who can't find work, who go to the urban areas, and unless Nepal goes through some kind of industrial miracle, you got to ask the question, where are they going to go, and what are they going to do? Upon that, USAID's, I mean, from USAID's experience in Nepal, I remember it being very difficult in terms of enacting some kind of rural programs and a sustained decline in fertility. What's the promise for fertility decline and a reshaping of that age structure?
Probably it's too technical question for me to respond, but what is my observation and what is the current debate in my understanding in Nepal about the population issue? Probably we need to take some measures in controlling population, particularly the population growth rate. Though we are able to reduce it little from 2.9 to 2.5, but still it is too high. So the family planning support from USAID, US government, is massive in Nepal still. It is operating with the positive impact in my understanding. But at the moment, this is not the priority in the political level, from the obvious reason. But what is in the discussion, the population control is one important factor, particularly the massive urbanization, unsystematic type of the urbanization and urban crime. All that is concentrated in the urban area, and redistribution of the population itself is also major challenges. And now some development thinker, planner are discussing to create the opportunity in the rural area. If we are able to redistribute or to retain the population of the hill and mountain, we have enough geographical area to properly sustain and support that. But the trend is such a high that all people from mountain and mid-hill are either moving to district headquarters or to small city centers or to Kathmandu Valley or to Tarai. And so there is lack of resources to sustain the increasing population in terms of infrastructure, drinking water, health facilities, schooling, all that in one side. In other side, the rural area is less utilized in terms of natural resources, in terms of land resources, and whatever potential there are. So some discussion are going on to promote the tourism, to promote the rural road system, and to promote, to create the opportunity in the rural area. And electricity and road, as I said earlier, they are the two major area they have identified potential contributor for that. So in that sense, obviously controlling population growth is one of the important area where in the long term this family planning and other appropriate means of population control will be instrumental.
Well, I think we've had a very rich discussion, Bishnu. I think, and also I should say, some excellent questions. Obviously, well, as so many cases and so many discussions we have, it's kind of unfolding, and so remains to be seen exactly where it goes. But in this sense, obviously at a critical moment, and so why we find it particularly valuable to have you both contributing to our magazine and understanding in that way, but also coming and joining with us here. I would say before we thank Bishnu for his presentation, he happens to be in town for a couple more days, and so if you were interested in following up with bilateral conversations, I know he has a fairly busy schedule, but perhaps there'll be opportunity, so just want to let people know about that. And also do a couple quick advertisements in some ways tied to some of these discussions. One is just day after tomorrow, Friday morning, we will have a book launch for a new book by somebody who's contributed a little bit to the analytical set of discussions on this issue. Thomas Homer Dixon will be in town. He has a new book called The Upside of Down, and that'll be 10 a.m. on Friday. We urge you all to come and join for that. And then later in November, we'll have Peter Glick talking about some of the water issues with his new book as well. So won't you all join me in thanking Bishnu for today's discussion. As I also mentioned, the PowerPoint slides are now, I think, already up online on the Wilson Center's website. Then the video will be accompanying it shortly, along with the meeting summary. So use the resources.
We have our accountant, our financial manager is still, we haven't closed out the fiscal year yet, and they'll be closing in the next couple of days. So, as soon as that's calculated, we can fill in the last paragraph. Is that okay? Okay, great.